the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand, and baseball in the summer. Someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer. Baseball in the summer.
VMAC Legendary Rivals podcast, and today we are thrilled to have a Brock Hall of Famer, the big first baseman, Colin Tyler, the destroyer of every single indoor practice ball we had, and one of the first people to sign up. So, Colin, it looks like you haven't aged a bit, which is weird given the rest of us have. Maybe I've seen Chris Peters too. He's another one that hasn't changed a bit. How you doing? What are you up to these days?
Well, you can tell that to my hairline. I think it's kind of gone away a little bit, but doing well, hanging in there, still, plugging along in life. I'm currently teaching my second career. I've been teaching now for about 19 years. Out of Brock, I kind of got into sport marketing out of that and spent about 5 years doing that, and kind of realized that was not my path, and decided to make a switch in my kind of mid to late 20s over to the teaching profession. And I've ended up doing that for a bit. Still actively or trying to somewhat actively be active in my sporting life. I guess, we'll kind of get into that, but since Brock, you kind of enter in all those adult leagues, adult men's hockey, and the senior leagues in baseball that, evolves into slow pitch, and it evolves into golf, and it evolves into curling, to kind of get out of the, higher contact sports and more into the kind of relaxed, transitioning to the retirement phases, hopefully soon, of my life.
have bat will travel, Colin. So that's exciting, and I think it'll be fascinating for everybody to understand a little bit more about you were very passionate about baseball. How did that all start? Like, were you in it right from the beginning when you were a young kid, or is it something that you picked up a little later, like a few of us?
Yeah, my baseball story is kind of somewhat bizarre and weird in the same way. Growing up, my father was from England, and he came over as a young kid, so he didn't really have a lot of knowledge about North American sports. I mean, he was big into cricket and things like that. He came over, he tried to adapt himself, he tried to play hockey, and but he was big into soccer. They used to stick him in net because he couldn't skate for hockey, and that was kind of his claim to fame. So, as having two boys, me and my brother, he was really kind of trying to get us involved into soccer a lot. Now, if you know anything about me, running is not a strength of mine, or it never was. So I, love to be the goalie for soccer. So at about the age of 5, I kind of, was splitting time between soccer and t-ball. But I was really enjoying baseball and baseball aspect, and the Toronto Blue Jays kind of came in, in 77, I think it was, and being born in 75, I kind of grew with that, the team and watching that team, and always followed it and always had this kind of love for baseball. But back in those days, I grew up in Scarborough, Agincourt. I mean, my family just knew that, if I wanted to play baseball, I have to play for Agincourt because that's where I lived. So played a lot in Agincourt. Never received any type of coaching. Back then, it was like whoever's father wanted to do it coached, and you'd show up to games and this and that, and I just kind of had that natural progression. Every summer I did that. Every winter I did hockey, to a point where I kind of got into my about 12, 13, and my decision was made that I was going to stop playing baseball, and actually ended up playing soccer for a couple of years. house league, nothing crazy, just to keep me busy in the summers. And then, I don't know, I was about 15-ish, maybe 14, 15. And I, finally made a decision that I really wanted to go back to baseball. It was something I loved to do, and got back into agent court. And at that time I was at a school called Crescent School, which was, it's near Bayview and Lawrence area, private school. And there's a teacher, very young teacher at the time, named Hugh Walters. And he was a gym teacher at that school. And I just happened to be playing softball in one of my gym classes out on the field. And he just happened to be walking by with his gym class, and I happened to be at bat. These weird things happen, just happens. I just happened to be at bat when he walked past, and I hit a ball, decently well. And it kind of just froze him, and he kind of stood at the top. There's the top of the hill that he was looking over at the game at, and he kind of, after the gym class walked over and kind of came up to me and asked me all about my baseball career and where I've been playing. And I'm just like, I'm just playing out in agent court. And, kind of looks at me. He's like, no. You got to get over into this Metro League. He goes, I want you to go try out for some of these teams like North York and Leaside. And, started listing off a bunch of teams. And this was all foreign to me. I had no idea what leagues he was talking about. So I started making phone calls. And, of course, this is already the springtime. And he was, all these teams already been set, already been picked. So they're pretty much just telling me, like, maybe next year, join House League, this and that. So the last team I called was Thornhill. They were just entered into this, this league. And the coach was kind of giving me the same story. But he says, you know what, we just lost our left-handed hitting DH. He just went to Newmarket. So we kind of need a left-handed hitter. Do you happen to hit left-handed? And I said, well, actually I do. So he's like, you know what, come to a practice. So I ended up going to a practice. The team was already made, and I kind of walked on and, wearing my agent court, gear, which, everyone was looking at me like, what is this guy, or where's this guy coming from, right? And, so of course we do BP. So we do BP, and I was, swinging the bat, and, after that, he kind of walked over the coach and said, hey, it looks like you can kind of swing the bat a little bit. So maybe we do have a spot for you here. And that's kind of where it all kind of started as I'm kind of getting more into competitive baseball. It's just that little freak little thing that got me onto that team. And then from there, it just kind of carried over into the Brock program.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, my friend. Hugh Walters was my third base coach in my first year of junior in Oshawa. And a hell of a great guy. Hugh is still involved with baseball to this day. And we've got a pretty funny story involving Hugh in the world's most violent baseball brawl that was done at Kinsman Stadium. And on account of Hugh, he shoved a guy named Troy May, who was coaching Leaside at the time, into the corner of the dugout at Kinsman. And Troy couldn't move afterwards. So his players went bananas. I'll tell it in the Chris Peters podcast, but it and I'm sure you've been in a baseball brawl in your career. Typically, they're a whole lot of nothing, right? It's a lot of kind of pretending you're doing something, but you really grab another guy that looks like he doesn't want to fight, and you kind of dance a little bit, but you don't really get into it. This was full out punching, fighting, people getting knocked into the backstop. They had to postpone a playoff game, and it was all due to Hugh. But what a great guy! So that. With a great eye for talent. So that is a really interesting, small world kind of moment. So, and ironic that Newmarket was not in the Leaside League, that someone would leave to go from Thornhill, which was playing in the best, at that point, league in the country, to go play Newmarket, which was playing UOBA baseball at that time. So, good for you, Colin. So tell me a little bit about what it was like playing in Thornhill.
Well, that's another story altogether. I mean, when you kind of get to that level, it's a bunch of teams that have already been playing together and know each other for so long. So I was always kind of the outsider, but, just kind of being, anytime you join a team, this is kind of what I believe is I don't necessarily jump in and bring out like any type of strong personality. I just kind of sit back, watch and listen and kind of see where I fit in and kind of start to dig out a bit of a role for what I believe I can do on the team based on what's around me. So when I joined that team, I was kind of splitting time between third base, first base, DH, kind of in the corner spots, depending on how I was hitting was dependent on how much I was getting into the lineup, which was somewhat consistent, consistently from day in and day out. But being the newcomer, you always have to kind of pick your battles and sit games that you probably think you shouldn't be. But Understanding that there is, a pecking order to things. So I did that for a couple of years. And then there was actually our final year, I think of junior. There ended up not being a coach for our senior team. And this actually might have been the time that was leading into the first year, junior, I'm talking about, leading into that first year of Brock. So that summer between the gym workouts and the first training camp, where we had a Thornhill team but no coach. But I was kind of worried even going to that summer. I'm like, God, I'm trying out for this team at Brock. I might not have a summer team to play on, because they were kind of saying that we might not even have a go with this with no coach. I'm like, it's too late to join other teams. And eventually the Thornhill people said, okay, well, you can continue with no coach, but as long as there's no issues or problems. So I think one of the parents had their coaching certificate, so sometimes he would step in during tournaments if we needed someone to be there. But it was just a group of kids that just loved playing baseball that just kind of kept coming to the park, making sure we had at least 10 guys there in case someone got to play. And, we'd roll in with 10 guys and just play. And we played the whole year, never forfeited a game, played a couple tournaments. And that kind of led me into the training camp right after that season. I think even during that summer, I think McRae came out to watch. It was a Thornhill-Oshawa game at Kinsman. He came to watch, I guess, because there was a bunch of Oshawa guys that were coming. And I don't know if he even knew I was playing that night, but he came out anyway. And unfortunately, we're playing against, I think Hatch was on the mound, lefty, who promptly, I think, no-hit us through 5. But I did hit a couple at people, which I claim to this day. But yeah, I think that was pretty much a short night. And I remember him talking to a number of Oshawa guys after the game. And I kind of, walked past, and he just kind of, had a couple words for me, and that was about it, and went my way. But
it's a good. I hate to say this as a guy who pitched against Thornhill, but it's kind of a recurring theme. The lefties no hitting the Thornhill team. I threw a one hitter once, and you guys in the 7th inning, and you were on the team at the time, a couple of years older. You bunted when I was throwing a no hitter in the 7th inning, and bunted, and it was a base hit. And I had to, in my inimitable way that I am the worst fielder ever, you bunted along the first baseline, and I got there, but my side and my back were turned to first base. So I attempted to do this flip where I picked it up with my bare hand and then flipped it kind of backwards, and ended up falling and skinning my elbow and whatever. And you guys got a hit, and then I was bleeding. So I got pulled from the game. And the score was 8-0 at the time, and we brought in a relief pitcher who promptly made it 8-7. You guys scored 7 runs in about 10 seconds. It was hit, grand slam, and a couple of other hits, and it was 8-7. We had to bring Hatch in to pitch in relief to win the game 8-7. But, the lefties always kind of, did well against Thornhill, from what I recall. And, but you guys were a good program, and given that you didn't have a coach, I don't even know how you would survive in Leaside without a coach, but you guys were always very competitive and had always great hitting. I think the pitching side of the equation maybe was not up to par with the High Parks and the North Yorks and the Oshawas at the time anyway.
Yeah, definitely the depth. I mean, I think everyone at the senior level, when you get to senior, pitching is so rare because everyone's arms already you're cooked by that point in time. But we'd always have like 1 or 2 starters, but after that, it's just you're just praying that you score 15.
Yeah. Or have a guy that can at least throw it over the plate and then not walk the house. But so that's amazing. What was your decision to what brought Brock University into the mix? Because you were there before there was a baseball, even the whispers of a baseball program. And what were you taking at Brock?
Well, the whole decision is, my last year of high school, my father's, he's a high school teacher. So was always, very structured and kind of very organized as far as planning my future. I was not big into planning my future because I still, firmly believe that, the things I wanted to do were not academic based, which blows my dad's mind to this day that I'm a teacher. So when we were kind of sitting down to figure out what schools to pick, based on just my personality at the time, we were kind of trying to find something that was kind of a smaller school and kind of, something where, or places that I might have family or friends near so that I could, either stay or be visited or, kind of have like a support model. So when we kind of sat down to look, at the time I had family, my grandparents were living in Hamilton. So McMaster was one of my choices. My brother at the time was going to Laurier. So Laurier was another one of my choices. And then trying to find something as a third option, we kind of stumbled upon Brock more because of this program that we'd never heard of. And my dad was just kind of like, maybe try this to see about a future. And it was called Recreation and Leisure, if you can believe it. So still
I do.
Yeah,
I do remember Rec and Leisure. Yeah.
So still to this day, when I tell people I graduated with a recreation and leisure degree, they just laugh in my face. Like, what were you doing for 4 years? And I'm like, well, pretty much playing baseball is what I was doing. But so ended up selecting Brock when all was said and done of the three. I was looking at phys ed for the other two, but kind of was more interested in this rec program, and ended up just going there just to kind of see how it went. And that's how I ended up there.
So I'm going to back the truck up because I had a roommate in second year who was in Rec and Leisure. And he said that a course that was offered as part of the Rec and Leisure program that everyone thought was going to be easy, that was a bird course, ended up being one of the hardest courses he took in all of university. It was called Games. And games was really all about the theory behind games. It wasn't about playing games. And as a result, it was really hard. He thought it was going to be... I remember everyone discussing kind of the bird courses that were there as electives, astronomy and, a few of those kinds of things. And people kind of would joke around about Rec and Leisure. And then when I had a roommate that was in it, he said, no, it was harder than I thought it was going to be because there was a lot of theory. Was that your experience?
Yeah, it was going into it, you don't really know what to expect. Two words that sound very fun. And then when you kind of go into it, a lot of it is a theory-based and, trying to create, programs for all. And you're kind of going into, people of every type of disability, trying to be inclusive. And, it was an eye-opener as to how you can turn this concept into a 4-year program. As I kind of went through, I kind of used that as my base. And as I went through the school, they started a sport management program, and there's other programs popping up where I can kind of branch out from that with my electives. So I kind of had a broad, scale of a lot of different subjects kind of and credits coming out of university at that time.
Interesting. And so, you're at Brock and there's no baseball program at that point in the twinkle of anyone's eye, including mine. But at some point in the spring of 1995, banners and posters and advertisements started popping up for a baseball club, which was kind of a really poor description of what it was. It makes it sound like we were a bunch of dorks. All apologies to the folks that do this, but I remember rotisserie baseball was big at the time, and we had to register as the baseball club, and it made it sound like we were getting together watching Jays games and pouring back the pints, but it really was a pretty serious team. And do you remember when you kind of came across the desk in the hallway there?
Exactly. And the funny thing is, everything you just said was exactly what I was processing in my head when I walked past. I remember it was a Thistle hallway. I had a lecture. And, because I went to all my lectures, of course. So I was walking down the hallway. My dad might be watching this. I was walking down the hallway, and I think I saw a banner that said Brock Baseball Club. And there was a table set up, and there's people at the table. And I kind of looked at the banner, and I kind of walked by, and I'm like, well, that's nice. They're going to have a little club about baseball. I walked right past. I didn't even stop. And I'm walking down the hall, and I'm just kind of processing my head. I'm like, wow, what would a baseball club be? I'm like, I bet you it's, guys sitting around talking about baseball and watching games, and maybe they'll have a fantasy draft and have a little baseball pool. And I'm like, that's nice. I go, well, you know what? And I walked all the way to the end of the Thistle. I'm almost out of Thistle. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stop and go back. Just out of sheer curiosity, what is this? And is this something that I could possibly bring myself to do, because of course, being a baseball guy, living baseball, I'm like, maybe we'll see. So I walked all the way back, and I kind of went up and I'm like, hey, what's this all about? And I don't know if it was you or Ted or whomever was at the table was like, oh, we're trying to get a baseball team. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea that this is what this was. So I got this little piece of paper to fill out, like name and age and like my past history of baseball and this and that, and how to contact me for tryouts kind of thing. And, had a quick conversation. I think one of you guys at the table were like, oh, like you were kind of shocked that I played in Thornhill, or I guess because you didn't know what to expect at that time. So having someone that actually played on a team that you'd heard of was, a positive at that moment. And filled out the form and kind of was on my way and just waited for the next contact of when the first tryout was.
Yeah, we would get, obviously, because Ted and I were both playing in the Leaside Metro League at that point. And, or Ted had graduated, but I was still playing. I had just come off of my junior season. And so I loved seeing folks that played in that league, because I knew the depth and the caliber of the players, and at least knowing that you're seeing top end pitching. It was a little bit different than my point of view on EOBA, or, we had a lot of players that came from COBA, the Central Ontario Baseball Association. But particularly people from the EOBA, and I hate to say this for the poor people that played in Peterborough or Kingston or Belleville or Port Hope or these places. But in Oshawa, because we were the easternmost Leaside team, and our general manager, Jim Lutton, was kind of old school and very much into the history, he maintained that we would have to play both the Leaside schedule and the EOBA schedule. So we played almost as double the amount of games as anyone else in the province. And the hard part is there was a huge talent disparity. Like the Metro League games were great, the opponents were great. Most people were going to the States, and you would go to some of these EOBA games. And the difference is, Colin, the best way I can put it is, they may have 4 players, okay, and maybe a pitcher and a half or 2 pitchers, okay, consistently on those teams. And whereas, a High Park or Leaside, even the weakest Leaside team was probably 6 deep in terms of great, really good players, and probably 5 deep in terms of pitchers that could, handle themselves. So we were just like, it was like being a fantasy owner. We would go through these player applications, and, Ted and I joke about the Etobicoke catcher putting down that his greatest skill was that he was a motivator. I am a motivator. So we should have got that on a t-shirt, but we ended up with one from Team Korea and one that said he was scouted by the Reds. So, you start to kind of fantasy, project what this team could look like. And, both the good and the bad of that is that the team ended up better than we could have imagined, but some of those applications may have been a tad misleading. So, what were you in residence at the time, or were you living off campus at this point?
That time, for my first year, I was in the village, living there, and then when the team started the following year, I ended up, and I date myself because even when I get new staff for people that I know coming to my school, and they're from Brock, and I talk to them about the new residents, they look at me sideways as to, what are you talking about the new res? And I'm like, and I start doing the math, like we're doing the math now. And I'm like, ooh, that was 30 years ago. So I guess that's not new anymore, right? So yeah, for all of us that were there 30 years ago, the new res, which is the one right beside DeQ, was the one that I ended up in for my second year.
Oh, it's unusual for someone to be in residence in second year. So that were you supervising a floor, or did you have a supervisory position of some sort?
I don't think anyone would allow me to do that, but it was one of those things. You know what it was? It was I didn't have access to a vehicle, and for me, I could my roommates from first year, they had got a house off campus after first year, and they were trying to get me to join them off campus for that second year. But I was always fearful that I would miss way too much class because I didn't have a way to get to the campus. So I applied to get back. I wanted to get back into the village again, but I guess that's more for first yearies, and I ended up into the new res, just more based on the odds of trying to get 2 classes was the only thought behind that. And so that's how I ended up there. And it was kind of the same thing, actually. I ended up in 3rd year. I ended up into Q for the exact same reason of I don't have a way to get to and from school. And I didn't want to have to rely on other people and, that's not to get there. So I ended up there, but, ended up mostly off campus with a lot of the baseball guys anyway, 24/7. So I didn't really spend much time there.
Pretty smart decision, actually, in retrospect. I think it's something that people underestimate is it's easy to miss class if you have to take too much effort to get there. The reality is I remember the folks from Res would a lot of times come rolling down the halls of Thistle in pajama pants and a t-shirt because, thank God at that time there were not Crocs because we would have seen tons of people in Crocs, but you could tell they just rolled out of bed and came straight to class. It was, but it's a good way to stay in your lectures. So we kind of roll into now the infamous winter or spring, winter indoor practices. Do you remember what were your early impressions of those? Because they started with different coaches than the ones we ended up with.
Yeah. So I have a lot of memories of those actually, because it was kind of my first introduction to something on that big of a scale when it came to baseball. I remember rolling in and it was just into the gym, and it was just like a massive amount of people. I'm like, I cannot believe how many people are in this gym right now. And it felt like every practice we had, a new coach was being introduced. Where it was like, this is our coach, blah, blah, blah. And then you'd go back, and then the following week you'd come back and be like, okay, well, this is our new coach. And then you leave and come back. This is our new coach. And I was like, how many new coaches are we going to have? And I was just trying to like, how come people don't want this job? Briggs Jude was kind of there throughout. And you guys eventually settled on McRae, who kind of showed up near the end of those, middle to end of those winter workouts where he kind of started to make an appearance. But I remember rolling in thinking to myself, there's a lot of people here. Like, I don't even know what my chances are. But I came with a roommate from my village. I'll keep their name out of this. As he, like those other people filling out those surveys, talked a really big game about his baseball career. So, of course, the first drill is, pick a partner, line up. We're going to just play catch the width of the gym. So, I don't even know. Like, honest to God, it felt like we were shoulder to shoulder with people because there's so many people. So it felt like there's 60 people on one side, 60 people on the other side. And it just felt like you're going to just take one right in the head if you're not paying attention. So I start off nice and easy. I had the ball. It was one of those gray, kind of squishy balls, it's an indoor training ball so that, if it hits the wall, it kind of bounces and ricochets off of it. So I just, nice and easy throwing at my partner. And all of a sudden, as the ball's kind of going, it wasn't like perfect, but it was in this region. Does like when 8-year-olds are afraid of the ball, they kind of turn their body and try and catch it like this. So if they miss, so of course he misses it, ricochets off the wall, back through the gym, and you hear it right, like boom, and all of a sudden the coach look around like who threw that, right? I'm like, oh my God, that was right at his chest. So I was like, okay, maybe that was just maybe he lost it in the lights or something or whatever, right? So of course he runs after the ball, grabs it, go back into line, and goes to throw it to me. And Poelman, this thing was like your pickoff, which I'm sure we'll get into, but this thing, and I was just like, oh my God. So this thing, now I'm chasing the ball because, I'm glad he hit the wall. I mean, that was probably a good thing for him. So again, I'm trying to navigate this game of catch just to warm up without looking like I shouldn't be here. So that was kind of my first introduction to the program. But yeah, those winter workouts were brutal. Eventually they kind of really got rid of like the people that shouldn't be there at all. And the numbers kind of got down and down and down. And it seemed like, the pitchers and catchers kind of got separated from our group, the position player group, because I, didn't really see much of any of you guys for a long time during those winter workouts. And we would just continuously be doing throwing, fielding, hitting drills, in the gym for that whole kind of, winter, and I just kind of kept checking the list to make sure that my name was on it each week to come back was kind of my thoughts through that whole process.
Yeah, I remember your name coming up really early in all of this, and it was the first person that mentioned you to me was Mark LePage. Mark LePage said, that Colin Tyler, he's just murdering the ball, and then so we were isolated upstairs, and we would do conditioning for like 90% of those indoor practices consisted of us running stairs, doing the towel drill, and then we would throw for 5 minutes. Tim Topping came on board somewhere in there. I don't remember exactly when. I'm usually pretty good with details, but somewhere about halfway through, Mike introduced us to Tim, and then Tim came out a few times, and he would bring these plates that you would throw over to the catchers. But I remember getting a requisition to buy more of those indoor training balls, and they said specifically it was because you were splitting them in half because you were just barreling them up so much. And I can remember Mark LePage talking to Ted and I at maybe in Isaac's for about an hour and a half just about your swing. And so I knew that was a good sign right there. But the other thing that was kind of weird, I think, is we had an immense number of first baseman type. So I think they focused on you at third base at the particular point in time because we didn't have any visibility to Jeff Hoover, who eventually came to the team. We didn't really have a third baseman. We had Brian Simmons, who kind of played all infield positions, was at those original workouts. But I remember that there were an inordinate number of catchers and an inordinate number of first basemen, imposing first baseman type, before we saw them on the field, obviously. But they were big. There was one guy that was 6'8", and there was another one that was 6'5", both starting at their junior organizations. And we had a lot of depth at, typically you don't have a lot of depth at first, or you don't have a lot of depth at catcher. But we had tons of players that came out that were from those two positions. It was really weird.
Yeah, it was. And at that time, when you're going through a tryout process like that with so many people, you can't help but start doing the math in your head as far as who your competition is and, what this roster might look like. I'm coming from a roster of like 10 or 12 in the summer to a potential roster of 25 guys. So you kind of assume like they're probably going to have a left-handed hitting, third baseman or first baseman as in addition to with a right-handed hitting one. And, so you're kind of doing the math that way. And at the time, I think I was playing third base with Thornhill. So I kind of wrote down that was my primary position, knowing that, most coaches understand that if you don't enjoy what they're doing at third, it's an easy transition over to first. So I didn't really have to put down first base because, if you, what I've learned now as I'm older, if you can hit, they find a position for you, which in my later years, I would always have about 4 different gloves in my bag because not that I could play any of those positions well, just because they're just trying to figure out how to slot me in. So I did a lot of third base in the winter workouts, and coming out of that, it was interesting though, because coming out of that winter workouts, I think they almost gotten the team down to about 30 guys. And going into the summer, I kind of assumed that, with the exception of a few cuts, like the team was already set. So I was already envisioning being, the left-handed hitting third baseman at the time with this other guy who's actually, coincidentally from Agincourt as well, was a right-handed hitting guy there. And the other two guys that you mentioned at first, I thought, they'd be the first baseman. And, rolling into that training camp, seeing all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, here we go again, because we have another ginormous group of people coming out again, and things just changed quite quickly from there. But the one thing I will mention, the one thing I do remember about those indoor practices, there's one day, it might have been with McRae, shows up with this hockey bag. And we're all like, okay, what's this? And he's like, we're doing something called a quick hands drill. So, things I've never done before. You open it up, and in it is a bag full of these, it looks like, like a high school, like home ec or like a high school shop project. So it was like a piece of plywood in the shape of a hand. And on the back was like these little, like an elastic kind of thing that you would slide your fingers in. So really, you just have a piece of plywood on your hand, and you have those gray, spongy, bouncy balls being whipped around, and you're trying to catch it on the board and throw it. Now, so of course I have to be part of this drill. And those things, I mean, there's no cushion on those things. So every time you get it's like hit a piece of plywood hitting your hand every 2 seconds when the ball's hitting it. And these things splintered. Like they were, like it was probably the cheapest piece of wood you could find. And after every practice, every infielder is like just pulling out these long, pieces of wood out of their hand the whole time. This is a great drill. Like, I'm glad my hands got quicker today using this thing, right? It was just you just cringe when you saw those things come out of the bag. And then the other thing that popped into my mind when you're talking about the hitting was back then we didn't have money, right? Like there was no money in this program. And I remember every hitting drill, we'd have to kind of improvise. And even in the gyms, we'd have like those big, see-through curtains that they have in the gyms that separate like basketball courts and things like that. So we'd always have to pull those across and hit into that. And if our live hitting was in a corner, so we'd pull one of those into the corner of the gym, and our L screen was a hockey net. So we'd pull out a hockey net, turn it on its side so the person wouldn't like get killed by a comebacker, and you'd just be throwing and just ducking behind this net for your life that this ball isn't going to ricochet off your forehead. Things that are you don't even think about now how unsafe that is, but it was just you had to do it. It was the only way to do that at that time with the funding and money that we had at that time.
Yeah, we had to spend almost $1,000 to fix the ballet studio. Thanks to the only place where we would use real baseballs was for pitching drills, and unfortunately we did a little bit of damage in our very first indoor practice. We were in debt before we even started. But that's it's interesting because that's when I do have a vivid memory of seeing you hitting for the first time while I was walking with, I think, the introduction of Coach McRae into the mix. And you were, hitting into that into that mesh net that was across the middle of the gym. And just such a pure swing, really. And it was just something to watch. You have a great swing. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So we go to training camp, and you're right. All of a sudden we're there we had thought we were pretty close, 4 or 5 cuts away. And all of a sudden there is an influx of recruited players. Now I had some insight into that because, 3 of them came from Oshawa. A couple others I had traveled over the summer to see. But there were some heavy duty players there all of a sudden. Jeff Hoover, being a third baseman from Welland and Team Ontario, being one of them. Tell me what it was like all of a sudden to be, thrust into a situation where there is tons of new, very talented players that had either come through recruiting through the players, or Mike and the coaches had recruited. And in Andrew Tinish's case, he just appeared out of the ether. Tell me what that was like.
So, rolling into that, over the summer, McRae reached out. I remember receiving this package in the mail, and, I opened it up, and it's like, the playbook, with all the signs and all the defensive plays and all the cut drills. And, it was like you need to do your homework before you show up at training camp and learn all of our, bunt plays and all of our signs and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm flipping through this, this is stuff that, I'd never ever seen or heard of before in my life. That's kind of cerebral side of baseball where it's like, oh, I guess there are different types of coverages for bunts, and I guess there are different types of, cut drills for different plays. And when runners are on base, it was kind of an eye opener of like, I need to start turning on my mind to this versus just kind of showing up and playing. So it was a complete crash course in, kind of baseball 101. Stuff that makes sense after you look at it, but stuff that you wouldn't naturally kind of understand until it's shown to you. So I roll into camp and thinking that it's going to be like the 30 of us from the gym, and here we go, and maybe get rid of a couple extra guys to get the roster down. And it's like, I don't know what it was, 60, 80 guys. I can't remember what it was, but it looked like I said, here we go again. The process is starting all over. I got to impress, new people. And, I think that's when Kemp showed up. I don't think he was there in the winter workout. So it's like, and he was the hitting guy. So I'm aware of my abilities to the fact that I knew that my strength was hitting. Running, defense, anything along those lines was I mean, it wasn't a horrible weakness. It just wasn't something that's going to stand out in a tryout or training camp. So I originally started off at third with a bunch of people. Hoover showed up, which I thought was a nickname forever because what a great name for a third baseman, right? And then I realized, oh, it's actually his real name. Didn't know that. So he kind of took over that, and then I saw him hit. I'm like, oh, damn it, he's a left-handed hitter too. So I'm like, there goes the left-handed hitting third baseman theory that I was kind of holding on to. So, worked out there. Kind of during that training camp, I mean, it was grueling. Like it was 5 days, but it felt like a month because those 2-a-days. I mean, when you say 2-a-days, it's 6 hours on the field, and it's 6 hours of 100% because you cannot. I mean, the expectations were so high that running for everything, running every drill, throwing everything at 100%. Even if you walk or strike out, you're sprinting. You look the wrong way, you're doing pulls. It was just one of those things where you're just constantly running. And by that Wednesday, my hamstrings, like if they could talk, they were absolutely screaming at me as far as like, you haven't done this much physical activity your whole life in 2 days, right? So it was one of those things where you just kind of, I can only control what I can do. I can't control what anyone else on the field is doing, and I just have to kind of stay in my lane. And whenever I can see a ball and kind of barrel it up and don't miss it. And if I get a play on the defensively, don't need to make anything special, but just make everything routine and just try and go from there. That's kind of my thought.
Yeah, it was. I think everyone's hamstrings were dying because of that lunge duck walk thing that we had to do, which wasn't a ton of fun.
I didn't have to do it. I won. So
yeah. Well, I think the steam was still coming out of my ears afterwards because we ended up with an injury as a result of that little experiment there. But do you remember any highlights of training camp, individual matchups you would have had against? I think there was a pretty hard line between the pitchers that were definitely going to make the team, and there wasn't. There was a certain amount of depth, but I don't think there was. You could pretty much see how everyone was going to slot. I think fairly early there, but you would have had some at bats against a variety of our pitchers. Anything that immediately comes to mind? Because I know you're a guy that remembers individual confrontations, as it were.
Yeah, I have a very bizarre memory like that, where little things that might not seem overly important kind of stick out to me. Yeah, because we'd often have inter-squad games, usually in the afternoons, as part of that. So, as a hitter, I always like to watch pitchers, even when I'm in a drill defensively and the pitchers are working beside me. I'll always kind of just look over just to kind of see, who, like, kind of just get an idea of, as weird as this sounds, but like release points and different types of pitches, and if the catcher's like, if he's hitting the glove and things like that. So, looking over my shoulder at times, one of the first guy that was kind of a little bit intimidating was Chris Ebel. He just had that look, like that Scott Erickson, like, had the black glove, always up like this, and just threw everything, everything was hard, and gloves never moved. It was like boom, boom, like this, and everything was down. Now, I can say this now, but I do not like the ball down. I like the ball up. So anytime I would see a pitcher consistently at the knees, I knew it was going to be a bit of a tough day. So he was a guy that I was like, if I ever got matched up against him, I knew it was going to be a tough at-bat. Now, fortunately, for whatever reason, never faced him that entire training camp. So I do remember a few at-bats, more because they were successful, where I know, and I'll probably mention the names, and not that, my first one I do remember is, Rob Creed, for example, great pitcher. One of our, starters coming into the season, was on the mound in the inter-squad game. This is me just trying to make the team, and we're at McMillan Park in Thorold. Now, this park is ginormous, and this is before. I know that now they've put in a fence in front of like the fence where the houses were, but originally the home run fence was where the house fence, and it was like a square. So center field was about 700 feet, and down the line was about 350 or 370 just down the line. So it was ginormous. Playing against him, and I think it must have been like just a get ahead fastball kind of thing to start me off, and hit it well to right center, hit it well enough where I could actually get a triple, which is how far this would have gone, right? To get me around on two like destroyed hamstrings. Yeah, made it to third base, kind of standing up and limping kind of around and trying to get, stretch it out. And I remember the coaches were behind the third base dugout, kind of, watching and making their notes. And I think it was McRae or someone yelled over and it's like, "Are you okay over there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, my hamstrings are a little tight," but I didn't want to kind of say like, "Oh no, I'm not okay."
I really need the oxygen tank.
Well, that's it. I don't want to give anyone any excuse to have like a negative comment for me on the card. I'm like, "No, I'm fine, just a little tight." So he's like, "All right, I'm going to put so and so in to run," even though I was already on third. So I'm like, "Okay." So I kind of walked and went behind the dugout and was just trying to stretch it out because I knew I was going to have to go play defense. So there's always conditioning at the end. Just trying to stay loose. And kind of looked over at me. He's like, like the only way you're making this team is if you keep hitting like that. Was the comment. I'm like, "Oh, okay. So you're saying there's a chance?" I'm thinking in my head.
So this is truthful. I've never known Mike to say anything like that. At the end of the day. So that is, I think, probably a fairly unique comment. But
Yeah, yeah, little things like that. I remember a base hit off of Joel Garden, another great pitcher for us. Another top 4 starter guy. On a curveball that he threw to me. And again, I'm just a naive kid from Agent Court / Thornhill that just kind of goes up and sees the ball over the plate and just kind of close my eyes and swing, right? And just just a nice line drive, nothing special, just a line drive up the middle, base hit. And I remember him kind of looking over, perplexed at me. And I was just kind of like, I don't understand what happened here. And later, he actually lived on my floor in that year. We're both in the new res on the same floor, and we kind of ran into each other later that day. And he kind of made a comment that not many people get a hit off that curveball. And little, I don't know. I got to give a little bit of shout out to my friends growing up. We'd play a lot of wall ball, Burby, whatever you want to call it. And I had 3 guys that I always played against. One guy threw gas, but never knew where it was going. One guy was a lefty. So I had a billion at bats against lefties because he was a lefty. And then I had another friend who always threw a 12-6 curveball. And Garton was a 12-6 curveball guy. So every time I see this 12-6 curveball, like I can see it before it even comes out of the hand because I see the fingers come over and you can almost see the ball pop up over like this. So right when I see that, I already know where it's going to be ending up at the plate. And it was one of those things where I'm like, oh man, I've seen that curveball. Not as good as Joel's by any stretch of the imagination, but I've seen that so many times that it was just old hat for me to put a string on it. So,
that's outstanding. It's, do you remember what it was like on cut down day? And did you have any trepidation about making the team?
Yeah, the entire time. I mean, the whole time I had no idea who was going to make the team. How it was going to pan out. I was just trying, I was just happy to get to Friday. And I was like, okay, I've made it this far. That shows something. And then right at the end of the Friday tryout, this now infamous drill that still to this day, we don't know why it happened, what went into it, if it really mattered or what. But the whole team was sitting on the hill, on the first base side behind kind of the dugout because there's so many of us that couldn't fit the dugouts. They're all kind of hanging out there. And he asked all the first basemen to line up at the first base bag to get field grounders, right? So I'm like, oh God, ground balls. Not my strength, but okay. So I think at the time there were 6 of us. And they ended up taking 4 of the 6. And it was McRae just hammering ground balls at us. I think we each got about 4 or 5 or 6. I don't even know how many we got each, but just hammering them right at us to field it. And even just to throw back to the plate was just nerve wracking because you didn't want to sail one, you didn't want to bounce one, you wanted to make sure it was right in the chest. So trying to field it, throw it back to the line, boom. Then all of a sudden he's hammering some down the line. So we had to dive. All 6 of us made the diving stop down the line, popped up, threw it to our other, like the second base side, making play. So we're all just like, after this drill, we're kind of looking at each other like, well, that didn't settle anything because we all made, the plays. And then the list gets posted. So I was just like, okay, well, I guess I'll just have to go see my fate here. So I walked over and, saw my name on the list, and I just, couldn't believe it. I was just so excited to be, part of this program and part of this team. And I think immediately, second I got home, I called my parents and just to let them know that this had happened, and they were just through the roof that I had made a team and that I was going to be playing baseball there.
Yeah, I wish I had insight into where they were, like headspace wise. I do know that it's unusual for a team to keep 4 first basemen. Played on enough teams where typically you got two of them, right? You got one that might be a right-handed stick and one that's a left-handed stick, and usually they can mash, and they kind of float between first base and DH. But I don't ever recall being on a team that had four,
Yeah.
because you could always put an outfielder there or whatever. So it was, it was pins and needles, from that perspective. It was a little bit different for some of the other positions where there was a clear gap between the people who were going to make it and not. I remember outfield being one of those types of things where there was four clear outfielders that were really amazing and very deep, and then there was probably a fairly significant drop off until when you got to the fifth outfielder. And it was the same on the pitching staff. There was probably 6, 7 that were, I think, fairly solid in terms of they were going to make it. There wasn't really a great competition on their spots, and then a few more on the back end that had to scrap it out. But it's unusual, and I'm sure that it was nerve-wracking, Colin. But I think your hitting stood out to. I know it stood out to the coaches and the players in particular. I think noted that you had a pretty sweet swing there, and we needed that element. What was your relationship like with Darryl Kemp, knowing that he was so involved with the hitting aspect of the team?
Well, it's interesting because Darryl's a quiet guy. At least he was on the field in the clubhouse. I don't know what he's like away from the field, but my only interactions with him were, during, hitting drills or in the cage. He'd be there. Oftentimes he might be even throwing the BP to us in the cages, also as our third base coach. And a lot of it was just simply working with my mechanics. And coming to Brock, I'd never really had anyone coach me. So everything that I had done was based on watching television or just whatever came naturally, just do that and, repeat on the playground over and over and over again. And when I got into that program, it was almost like they broke down my swing and kind of built it back up. Not necessarily changing it, but helping me understand it. And understanding, where my weight should be, how balanced I should be, where my bat head should be on contact, separating your stride and your swing, the trigger. There's so many things that went into it that I had no idea. I would just do. So that it was hard, for me to get into a slump, because every time I started to do something that might have led to a slump, a guy like having Darryl Kemp there, he would immediately recognize it and give me even just a verbal or visual cue, even from the third base coach's box. If there was one pitch that I, took and I didn't do something, he might just look at me and just say, like, eye down there. Or, if it's a 3-0 count or a 2-0 count, he might remind me, like, shrink your zone. You don't need to go chasing here. Just these little things that, would just help you in that moment when you're unable to focus on that element of hitting, that he's able to do that, give it to you in the game, and then applying it so that you can, quickly make that switch or make that change to have a successful at bat, like right then and there. So it was huge to me. And even to a point, my third year there at Brock, I had a rough spring. We actually had spring schedules in the second and third year, and I had a bit of a rough spring, and Kemp wasn't there. And I remember having a conversation with Coach LePage about it, and I just said, and he was actually driving us down to St. Bonaventure, the last game I ever played at Brock. We had a doubleheader at St. Bonaventure, and we're kind of going down. I was kind of saying to him, and he's like, "Oh, your spring isn't as good as what your fall has been, and this and that." And I go, "Yeah." I go, "You know what? It's just I just feel with Kemp not there, it's really noticeable." So I'm doing something wrong with my swing, but there's no one there to help me and to correct it and pick it out. And so we kind of talked through it a little bit it's a long drive to St. Bonaventure. And, I kind of talked through it with them and talked through my swing. I'm like, yeah, I used to do this, this, and this. And then it kind of clicked into me that I can actually be my own doctor at times, because as I talked through with him, I'm like, actually, hold on a second here. I think this is the problem. So anyway, went to St. Bonaventure. I had a great doubleheader that day. I brought my average up. I think I don't know, I was 5 for 6 or 6 for 7, because I think the other coach was losing his mind on his players when I came up in my last at bat and screaming at his second baseman as to why he wasn't shading me up the middle. because I'd hit 6 balls between left center and right center. So I remember him screaming at his second baseman, like, "Why are you still playing in the hole? Like, move over. This guy's hit everything there." And sure enough, I hit a line drive up the middle, and the stupid second baseman makes a play on it. And it's like, "You pricks!" And I ended up going. That was the out I had that day. But yeah, it was one of those things that he's such a quiet influence that you don't realize until he's gone.
Well, it's interesting. I played with you after Brock, and I know that your power alley is from right center to left center. And, most people, I think coaches with a little lack of experience and players with a little lack of experience, they assume that everyone is a dead pull hitter in their defensive alignments. And that's, against the really good hitters, that is a death sentence to give up 5 for 6, because the reality is the way that a really good left-handed swing works. And I saw it with you, I saw it with Brad Reese and others. Really, the power alley starts about mid-right center, and you also have the ability to go with the pitch, but generally we'll go over the into the power alley over the shortstop's head. So it's interesting to hear that. It's funny that they didn't make the adjustment until you had abused them for 5 hits, but. Speaking of St. Bonaventure and traveling down to the United States, now we're into the season in the first year. And, any, really interesting recollections from our travels or games or schedule in the first year prior to Nationals, obviously?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, I remember my first ever at bat with Brock was the first doubleheader we had. I think it was against Niagara, I believe.
Yeah.
And Ebel started that game, and we got pounded. It was, I don't know what it was, 10-12-0 going into the 7th inning. And we had a runner on third base, and McRae puts me in for a pinch hit. And I got in there, and and I just knew I was just, if I had 4 at bats in a day, it would be shocking if I saw more than 4 pitches. And I got in there, and it was a fastball, a little bit up on the outside corner, and I just went at it, took a hack at it. Didn't hit it great, got off the end of the bat, but I got enough of it where I, singled over the third baseman's head, down the line a little bit, scored our run. And, it was the first run that the program had ever scored. I got to first base, and I wasn't happy with the at-bat because, I'd rather barrel up something, but still. Remember the in-between the games, McRae did the big speech about how you got to be ready to come in and, good job for, I was always referred to as Colin Tyler. Everyone had a nickname, but I was always Colin Tyler for some reason. Wasn't Colin, wasn't Tyler. It was always, and Colin Tyler. Colin Tyler, came in when he was ready. Was first pitch, was ready to swing, and got the base hit to score the run. And then I started the next game, and I got a couple hits in that game too. So that was kind of a big day for me, just kind of realizing like, okay, maybe I can do this at this level. This is a Division I program, and I had 3 hits and I think 4 or 5 at bats against them. So I was kind of like, okay, maybe I do belong here. And then kind of going into the season, there's so many little memories of mine that a lot of people would have no recollection of. But, I remember a Guelph doubleheader, and you've made comment to the 4 first basemen. So Chris Peters being one of the 4 first basemen, he dubbed us, the kindergarten club. And everyone was like, well, what's the kindergarten club? And it's like, well, we have doubleheaders, and there's 4 of us. So you play for half the day and you go home. Is really what happened. So it was like, yeah, you make sense because nobody ever really plays a full day or a full game or this and that, right? So I remember playing against Guelph in a doubleheader, and again had another decent day at the plate. And I remember hitting a ball in the left center gap and scored a couple runs. And I'm rounding first going into second base, and the throw was going home. So I kind of let up a little bit going to second because I'm like, oh, it's a stand-up double. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the third baseman decides to cut the ball and fire it to second base. And I'm like, oh, dear God. So I'm already kind of in a mode where I can't now speed up, but I'm not even thinking about sliding. So I'm like, I got to get to second, which I did before the ball got there because it was, But my momentum, I could not stay on the base. And the guy had the ball, and he knew. He's watching me, and I'm just doing like the old hockey like this. And finally, my leg comes off the base, and I'm out at second. And I'm just like, oh, damn. So I turn around before I'm even halfway to first base. I'm already hearing in the dugout, like, I don't know who it was, but like 20 for 25. All right. All right. Well, that was a good day. I'll go sit down on the bench and cheer on the boys. But yeah, little things like that. I mean, a lot of our trips that we had were priceless. Like, just the Coopersdown trip that we talked about. I was not scheduled to play that day until the infamous, shall we say, dispute with Daryl Houston. I don't remember too much about it, but visually, I think there was, McRae and Houston, something had happened, and the two of them did not see eye to eye. And I think that there was a bunch of people that are kind of restraining the two. And I'm kind of sitting there in the dugout watching this whole thing unfold, thinking to myself, I better start swinging a bat soon because Daryl's DHing. And I think we're going to need a DH soon. And sure enough, I think he had sent him, to the Vans or something to wait for the game. And then I was like, so I got the second half of that game and the start in the next game at the DH spot. So it turned into a good day for me. But, it was an interesting day. And, of course, Nish being shot at in right field, he kind of comes in. I remember him coming into the dugout, and he's like, guys, like, I'm being shot at. And we're like, what are you talking about? There's a kid in the tree with a BB gun shooting at me. And then Kemp walks over, and he's like, hey, he goes, you're being shot at. Just call time. Like, that makes sense. So then they called the sheriff. So the sheriff had to come in to kind of deal with the problem, and he was politically not correct. And maybe if you ever get a chance to talk to Rick Bottomley, you can ask him what he said to the dugout, because it was a little offside. But anyway, we got the active shooter under control and out of the game, but and continued on. But I think we took both ends of that doubleheader from them. But yeah. A lot of good memories of games that I can kind of keep going back to. Whenever someone brings up a specific game, I'm like, this is what I remember from it.
Yeah, I drew the short end of the straw when you talk about the Niagara game and the Guelph game. I had to pitch the second half of both those doubleheaders. So, I had pitched against most of the Niagara summer players that summer. So, the next game, it was our first D1 experience, so we probably didn't react real well in the first game. But second game was much more competitive. I think we ended up losing 4-3, from what I recall. 4-3, 5-3. It was close, and just showed the resiliency of the team and our ability to be competitive, not necessarily win against the D1 schools. But the Guelph game, I remember, I brought this up in Ted's podcast. The first game, our pitchers were really wild. They walked 8-9 guys in the game, and Guelph wasn't that strong a hitting team, so if you threw strikes, but I had to start the next game, and Mike was seething, to say the least, about the performance of the pitchers. And it was my second start. I had been a little bit dinged up coming out of training camp, and 2 pitches into the game, he was screaming his head off at me to throw strikes. And I remember being so, upset about that. I was like, I'm not going to have the coach yell at me anymore. So I may have thrown every pitch from there on in right down the middle, not worrying about it getting hit. But, that kind of not wanting to disappoint Coach McRae, I think, was a big motivator for all of us. And I don't know if you got caught up in that, but there were days where I was like, I can't face Mike looking at me like a disappointed father. I got to go out and be a leader, perform well.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, because when you think about that time, I mean, he really wasn't much older than us, but at the time it felt like he was 30 years older than us. And he was like, he brought a culture to the program where, and it carried on. Like, he was there for 1 year, but that McRae culture that he had created, it carried over for years after he was gone. And, he was definitely like, this is what I want. And this is the line. And don't you dare, not only don't cross it, but don't even get near it. And he was someone who expected a lot and extremely high expectations on everyone, especially when it came to effort. He wanted to make sure everyone was kind of giving their 110%. And his reaction to not seeing that was always a physical consequence, whether it was, running or push-ups or this and that. So it was very kind of, like a military kind of style of coaching. And, like I've been in baseball long enough now, and I've seen, and even in teaching long enough where I know that everybody has their own method, way, philosophy of doing something, and every single way works if run properly by the person putting it in place. And with McRae, I was always worried or nervous about doing something not the right way. So I always wanted to make sure I did everything the right way. But I do remember, having a couple of those. We had those two conditioning practices. Which, I think it might have been after the Guelph game or something. We might have dropped a game to Guelph or something. It was a team that we might have dropped a game to that we never should have dropped a game to, but it was just one of those days that nothing went right. And still to this day, when I run into some of the guys from that team, I still see, Chris Grucci and Rick Bottomley and Just Dixon and, Andrew Tinish. And, there's a number of guys that I still kind of run into, once or twice a year. We try and get together. But they still look at me and they say, Colin, you saved us those two conditioning practices. And what it was we had to get there at 6:30 in the morning, and it was a 6:30 to 8:30 a.m. And this is, and I, had like a 9 or 9:30 class that I wouldn't get to because I was just exhausted. And we'd have to, I think it was also at McMillan Park in Thorold that these things happened. So he would try and get us to run poles or whatever. But these poles are, they're mild. Because like I said, that field is ginormous. So this running was not a natural running. And the very first sprint that he said was, whoever's last does it twice. So this was a battle between, it was almost like Chris Peters and I. We locked eyes, right? We kind of looked down at each other and just like, okay, so I guess it's up to one of us to see who's going to beat who. So, the first sprint happens and the two of us are like neck and neck to see who's not going to be last. And I think for the first one, I might have beaten him out. So he had to do it twice, but I was gassed. I'm like, I can't do this. So being the thinker, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, should I be going out like 100% during these drills? And I had to make this decision quick. Should I go 100% doing these drills, possibly finishing last and having to do it again at 100%? And probably vomiting within the next 13 minutes? Or should I go 75% knowing that I'm going to do it twice? And I can just pace myself doing every drill twice for the whole. So I quickly made the call of, I'm going to go into 75% mode. So did the old 75%. Peters beat me by a few steps. And Tyler, go do it again. So back and forth, no problem. And so the entire day of every drill, I'm doing it twice, and the whole team is pretty much sitting there watching me do it twice. But in my head, I'm like, I'm fine with this because I'm definitely pacing myself so that I know that I'm going to be physically okay after this 2 hours. And I think by the end of it, the only puker was Peters at one point.
Yeah. Peters, I always say to him, your nickname should be Puke, but it's those were tough, and we had some moments like that. We had a highly successful regular season, and I remember a practice near the end where we showed up to practice. We had won a few games and a whole bunch in a row at that point, but it was a couple weeks out from nationals, and Coach McRae turned it into a really intense practice. It was like tons of running, very intense, a lot of barking at us and that kind of stuff. I thought, Jesus, he's being hard on us and we're having such a great year. But he was always pushing our buttons just in terms of never getting complacent. And I will say that for the vast majority of the players, they maybe never had a better year or never had, came as far from where they were to when they ended, in terms of their skill set. But it's a style that I think, can push a lot of motivational buttons because you don't want to disappoint. But I was very glad that we had the second tier of coaches that you could go to if you were feeling off or you needed someone to really kind of pump your tires a little bit. Coach Topping for the pitchers was great at that. He was just a friendly ear, and sometimes you needed that. And we had, and I think Kemp was a little bit like that, but maybe Wayne Briggs-Jude or Mark LePage or Jeff Lounsbury was that for the position players a little bit. What were your relationships like with the other coaches?
So, LePage, like he was a student there at the time, and he kind of quickly transitioned into a coaching role. And the strange thing about that is that during the first year, I had kind of realized that he had a friend at the school who was I would say one of his better friends, was best friend, had another friend with my brother, that he and one of my brother's roommates. So my brother's roommate and LePage's friend were like really good friends. So we kind of made that connection, even during the tryouts, where we'd have conversations, not even about baseball, but just kind of how it's a weird relationship of how we know similar people. And, I'd see him in the Thistle hallway and we'd sit down and just chat about, hey, how's this person doing? How's that person doing? So whenever I would kind of talk with LePage, it was kind of on a coach level at the Diamond, but away from the Diamond, it's more of like a friendship of, just talking about, anything and everything to do about Brock and things that are going on. And he was good too. Like, he knew that there was some things that he couldn't talk about, and that he could talk about. And, if you ever know LePage, like, he can keep things pretty close to the vest at times. So, it was a good relationship that way, where I never really overly felt like intimidated or anything like that with him, more like a friendly kind of person to have. With Jeff, again, he was, active with the team and, participated in a lot of the infield drills and things like that. So, with me, like, when I see coaches, like, I just kind of view them as like that authority figure. And it's always been like that through my whole life. So I was more of like, I just listened. I was more of a sponge. Now, if I'm sitting on a bench and there's during a game, like, I might chirp some things out of my mouth that, just because it's funny. But that's just more because I just enjoy humor and have a good time. So, that kind of happened. And sometimes I'd get a chuckle out of the coaches. So I knew it was a good one if one of the coaches actually broke character and actually laughed at something that I'd said. But yeah, so that's kind of how that relationship was more of just, listening to what they had to say and trying to go out and do what they wanted or what they were asking me to do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We'll tackle nationals in a bit here, but I did want to get into a couple of other things that most people don't know about. Tell us about the Baseball Stars intramural hockey team, because this is,
Yeah. So it was after our first year, and in the winter, a bunch of the guys wanted to kind of still stay together, and that's one of the things too. Like, when I was in my first year at the school, like, I knew enough people that I on one hand, I had my 3 roommates in the village. There might have been a couple other people that I may have known through my program, but that was it. And as soon as that team happened, it was like I could walk into any pub on campus or any hallway, or walk into the gym complex, or walk in anywhere, and there was like a group of like 25 people that you not only knew, but like almost like you knew well. Like, they were almost like family to you, or you could walk in and everyone would was like high five and this and that. And so it was like a whole different experience. So that was just that was an interesting thing. I've already forgotten your question. Where did we go with your question?
Baseball Stars hockey.
Oh my God. So then trying to stay together as a group after the season. And I don't know who it was. It might have been you or Ted or somebody that was going to put a intramural hockey team together. And, was asking if anyone on the team, does anyone play hockey? So, of course, I'm like, oh, no, I play hockey. I played, growing up in Toronto, back in the day, it was called the SHA, and then, playing in the MTHL and that kind of stuff. So I told Ted, I play. So, of course, he created this team called Baseball Stars after our wonderful Nintendo game that everyone kind of is just the greatest baseball game of all time on Nintendo. And, every like 11 o'clock or midnight, I needed a ride everywhere. So somebody would come up, whether it was, one of you guys would come up in your car and grab me from the new res and hop in, and we'd go and, participate in the intramural hockey league.
Yeah, Ted to this, it definitely was Ted, because I can't skate. So, skating is kind of one of those required ingredients for hockey. But Ted swears that no one could get the puck off your stick, and that you were, a superstar in that regard. So,
well, like baseball and other sports, skating was not a strong point for me. Like, my dad would always put me into these skating clinics and trying to get my skating better, but it was just not a thing for me. So the only way I could survive is to make sure that I knew how to stick handle with a puck. So that kind of saved me, so that when you go to an intramural where there's no body contact and no one's coming up to challenge you, you can pretty much keep that thing on your stick as long as you want, and put the puck in the net. It was quite nice, actually.
Well, it's fun to hear that there was some continuation, obviously, and when you bring up the names Jesse Dixon, Andrew Tinish, Rick Bottomley, Matt Fletcher in particular, you guys were all very tight and had formed a pretty good bond in that first year, and really were the ones that continued on, because a lot of us got, as I dive through these podcasts, there were a lot of people that graduated from, a lot of the pitchers graduated after the year because it was their third year. Ted and I got the opportunity to go run the sport nationally for a year. But talk to me about, your lifelong relationships with, let's start with Rick Bottomley, who, the thing I remember about Rick was he just had always the best smile, right? And really easygoing guy from that perspective, and I love him for that. And a great player. But did those roots for that great friendship start in first year?
It was one of those things that happened kind of in between the first season and the second season. Now, after the first season, there was a lot of question marks about the team moving forward. We didn't even know if there was going to be a year two, because there was so much turnover. McRae left. We didn't really have a coach. A lot of the players either graduated, didn't come back, moved on to other schools or other programs, and there was really like 7 of us left. With my, and I'll probably miss somebody, but Dixon and Bottomley and Tinish and Fletcher, myself, Grucci, Ebel was still kind of around. Actually, no, Ebel was gone. No, sorry, Hoover. Hoover was still there at that point in time. He actually ended up going to Niagara, I think, after that, but he was still around. And we knew that we were given gym time, which was, I knew, such a battle for you guys to get gym time for us. Mm-hmm. And we were given gym workout time at 6:30 a.m. I think it was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in the morning. And the 7 of us, we were still kind of fearful of missing practice, because if you ever missed a practice, you were pretty much cut. So we're like, we can't miss a practice. And we also knew that if we didn't show up for this gym time, that might give a bad impression to Bob Davis, saying, well, why am I sticking up for this team, or why am I giving gym time for this team if they're not even going to use it? So for the entire winter, the 7 of us at 6:30 every one of those mornings, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we would go to the gym, and we would hit, and we would throw, and we would have someone hitting ground balls. We'd do all the little drills that we were doing in the previous gym workout, just with the 7 or 8 of us that would get there and do that. And so we developed a very close friendship even from that, because a lot of times, on a Friday morning, if we were out Thursday night, there were often times where we'd look at the clock and say, well, practice starts in 2 hours. You might as well just stay awake and just go in, right? And we'd roll in. We were zonked, but we would go through the motions. And sure enough, every once in a while, we'd look over our shoulder up into the bleachers there behind, and maybe you might see Bob Davis's head kind of sticking out and looking down to see what's going on. And I think one time even McRae showed up. I think he was just shocked that people were coming to this practice. So I think one time he wouldn't be one to say that he was there, but I think someone kind of got a glimpse of his head kind of sticking over, looking down at the gym. And that's kind of where it all began. And we were all, residence people. I know, Bots came in from Stony Creek, and oftentimes he would crash at one of our places. So that's kind of where that friendship developed. And even, I'm not sure which year it was, but he did spend a year. When you spent a year at Thornhill, he spent a year as well at Thornhill with Matt Fletcher. And like you said, first of all, he's a great center fielder, probably one of the greatest center fielders I've ever played with. Coming from, Agincourt and Thornhill, we'd have 1 or 2 good players. Having a 25-man roster of solid players at every position, I was just floored as to how good the team was. And had always that happy attitude. You could say anything to him, any type of joke. He was always a good audience for a good joke. Always laid back, and he's just one of those guys that you just like being around. Which was kind of like a lot of that crew. Was we all? growing up in sports, the most favorite thing to do is rip on each other, right? Just find something that bothers somebody, and you just zone in and just don't let it die, right? So yeah, we just had a great time together. Yeah.
No, I and I see that, and I think it's wonderful. I think for Andy Tinish, and Matt Fletcher in particular. Fletcher was always as a pitcher, you would always have a close relationship with your catchers, right? You just didn't have much of an option, and Matt was always just interesting to, because he was a freshman, and I was in my third year at Brock and had pitched a lot of games already at that point, so to say that I'm surly at times when I'm pitching is probably an understatement. So Matt would come out to talk to me, and I think, I'd either bark at him or I'd threaten to bite his nose off of his face or something, but he'd be like, Mike, you got to throw a curveball here, because, I'd eventually listen to him, and just a great guy from that perspective. But, at the time, at Brock, when I first threw to him, like, the expectation was that he would come out and be silent, look at me, listen to what I say as a pitcher, because, you have that kind of a unique scenario where you have to be in control of what you're doing. But, that is a core, if you think about it, that came out of that first year team that is almost 100% Hall of Fame players, right? So really interesting from that perspective. We'll get back into the season now, so we can talk about, some of the more ridiculous aspects of the season. One of which is something that you gladly pull out in front of me every time you see me, which I think was against, I don't remember whether it was Durham College or whether it was Genesee Community College, or maybe one of the U.S. games. But maybe you can describe this for people. The time that I try to pickoff throw into our own dugout.
Well, so the first issue is being part of the kindergarten club. That, like, at any moment that something goes wrong, especially involving a first baseman or anything at first, like, you're looking over your shoulder that your day's done. So somehow I got to start at first. Now, as my first year on the team, I was not considered one of the starters. I think I ended up with about 45-ish at bats, and I think most of our starters were about 120-ish. So I played about a third, maybe just under half of the time as far as my at bats go. So I finally got this start at first base, and I'm holding a runner on base there, and you're on the mound, and you come set, and you decide to come over to first. And this throw, I swear to God, it might have been a pitch out, but no, it wasn't. It was a pickoff, because it was definitely closer to Matt Fletcher than it was to me. But it sailed right into the dugout to a point where I'm getting ready for this. All of a sudden, I'm just looking like, what? And then all of a sudden I could think to myself is like, okay, my day's done. Because somehow this is my fault not coming out and running 70 feet down the line to make a diving stab on this to keep it out of the dugout. And I just looked at you, and you're just like, kind of marching around the mound, like, why did I even try and do that? It's not it's not part of my game. So yeah, no, that was horrendous.
Yeah, I may have been one of the only pitchers in the world that couldn't have base runners because they were going to steal second, or I was going to throw it away, or fielding my position is something that it was just a non-starter. Every team I ever played on, they're like, Mike, don't touch the ball. Just don't attempt to catch it. Don't attempt to field it. Don't attempt to do pickoff. And that was ugly. I mean, it was bowling shoe ugly. It was that bad. I don't even know still to this day how I managed to throw it directly between first and home.
Yeah, it was disastrous.
Yeah, so that thank God YouTube didn't exist, because that would be the absolute. This is not what you do as a lefty. And lefties are supposed to be these people that have great pickoff moves. You and I both played against the great U of T lefty Mike Loretto.
Yeah.
And I used to try to emulate him and David Hatch and their pickoff moves. Hatch had a good one too, where he'd pick up his leg and look like he was going home, and he'd go to first. Yeah. And I think that's what I was attempting to do, except the problem is as my weight started to come down, I was like, oh, I'm over the 45. This is clearly a balk. But for some reason, instead of just taking the balk, I decided to throw it too. And I was going in the direction of where my leg was going. So just horrendous and maybe one of the most embarrassing plays ever.
Yeah, your problem is thinking. You got to stop thinking.
This thinking is just not par for the course. Or just, when I was good as a pitcher, there was no base runners. So I should have just stuck to that policy. I don't know what I was thinking putting someone on, but and let's talk a little bit about, I think one of the really interesting dynamics that I remember quite well is the relationship you and Ted Gendron had, where you guys were always doing those little witty comments all the time and kept keeping everybody pretty loose. And, you'd look over and you'd be doing exactly what you're doing now. You'd have that smile. But it was usually after you had unloaded on someone and they were, either a pool of laughter or a pool of tears. Is that a big part of what you bring to teams, is just that ability to keep people loose? Because, there's certain people that do it. And, it's not a skill that you see in a lot of. Talk to me a little bit about how you try to fit in on teams.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's kind of one of those things that's been, part of my entire life, just even in a social realm of situations where, you're meeting new people or this and that. It's something that's just developed over time of helping me kind of get through stressful situations where I always, for whatever reason, and this might go back to my British background and growing up on British comedies that are very just, dry, just cutthroat, one-liner type jokes. My father, my grandfather, exactly the same way, where they just always have a pun or always have some type of, one-liner, whether it was either at the dinner table or this and that. But they just kind of carried over in sport where it's just one of those things that helps me kind of relax and me to fit in, and kind of gets the team to kind of relax just a little bit and just realize that it ultimately is a game. And there are winners and losers, and as long as we're out here and do it, not that trying our best, blah blah blah, but it's one of those things where it's like, if you're not having a good time, why are you here? And regardless, you can be upset and angry when you lose, but at the end of the day, did you enjoy the experience and whatever? And that's kind of what I look for. And I got into coaching, in my mid-30s. I did about 4 years with the Ontario Blue Jays, and it carried over. I mean, everyone has their own way of coaching, and I was always trying to make the players comfortable enough to take risks and take chances, as long as they were doing it with using their head. So if they were able to explain to me why they decided to do something, and whether it was the right reason or not the right reason, I had no problem with that. And as long as they were comfortable to take risks, that's how you're going to get better. So they would, take your risks. We'll talk about it after, and we can walk through it. But if you just said, I don't know why I did it, I'll be upset with that. But if you can say, I did that because I saw, the catcher drop to a knee, and I felt like I could get to third base when he was throwing it back to the pitcher because I saw that. I'm like, okay, that's great. You're thinking, even though you got thrown out by 30 feet, it's fine. But, maybe then we'll talk about maybe it's not the right situation to try that because, for whatever, right? So it's one of those things that the humor kind of creates that ability in people of just trying to relax and trust their own kind of instincts and get into their own comfortable space, so that there's not other things in their mind that is clouding their judgment when they're pitching or playing defense or trying to have an at bat. My favorite comment is when a batter goes up to the bat and it's a pitch that's in the dirt or over their head or way off the plate, and they go swing at it and foul it off, and I'm always yelling out, hey, way to fight off the 0-0 pitch, right? So it's one of those things where it's have a plate. Don't just go up there and chase something that's bouncing in front of the plate. You gotta, just gotta relax. And they always giggle off, say, you're right. Next time I go up, I can't just be up here with no plan in place, kind of thing, right? So it's one of those things just to kind of make you more realize what's happening and just kind of train your thoughts better when you're having an at bat or that. So.
Well, I think that's interesting because it brings us to something that we can laugh about now, but probably weren't laughing about at the time. The infamous practice that went on for an extra 45 minutes, I think, because of a cut drill that the coaches were trying to get one of our infielders. Yeah, it's okay. We could say it. It was Ryan Thompson to be vociferous, and he just wouldn't let his vocal cords loose, and the rest of us paid the price. What do you remember about the cut drill that went wrong?
I remember being hungry, first of all, because our practices, on a good day, our practices went to about 6:30, and the residence cafeteria closes at 6:45. So I remember that in order for us to get back and eat dinner that night, we had to leave right at 6:30, race back, because nothing was on campus, right? So everything was off campus. And we'd have to get back to that residence hallway and try and get in there before it closed. It got to a point where the people on staff knew that we were always kind of cutting or, really close. They would try and stay open a little bit longer for us. But anyway, it was definitely we're doing our cutoff drills. And Ryan Thompson, who I don't really even remember talking much. I think he's just a quiet guy in general. Very quiet guy, very reserved. And we're doing the drill, and McRae was like, as a shortstop, you have to be the most vocal guy in the diamond, and you have to yell cut so that we know what's going on. So he's like, do you understand this? And Thompson's like, yes. So we do the drill, whatever comes in, his hands are up, doesn't say the word, and McRae loses his mind. He's like, you have to say the word cut. And we're kind of going back and forth, and he's like kind of nodding that this is happening. So he's like, we're not even hitting a ball. All I want you to do, Ryan, is yell cut as loud as you can. And it was like one of those things where it was just a stare down between the two of them. And I don't think it was like an aggressive stare down. I think it was more just Ryan was probably just nervous and, just didn't feel comfortable at this point screaming the word cut. And neither backed down. And it was going on and on and on. And I'm standing there at first thinking to myself, oh my God, we're going to be ordering pizza tonight, which isn't the end of the day, right? But yeah, it went on for forever, and I don't know if he ever did. I can't remember if he actually eventually did yell the word "cut" that allowed us to go home. But it was one of those ones that just felt like it wouldn't end that night.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing if you think about it, but it's kind of infamous. So, I would yell "cut" when I came to play in Thornhill just for the fun of it. Now that brings us to the national championships, which were an interesting experience. Referendum weekend, traveling to Montreal. You've got your own perspective on the nationals. Why don't you just kind of lay that out on us here?
So, well, what I remember is that we had a practice the morning of going to Montreal. And we were told to bring all our stuff to the park, our luggage and our equipment and all this kind of stuff. And I got a phone call from McRae, and it might have been the day before, saying, I want you to show up early to the practice for some extra BP. And it was me and a couple other guys. And I don't remember who it was. But, I kind of showed up to the park, and he called me at McMillan Park. There's like a little building behind home plate. And there's like a little upstairs, I guess, where there's some people change or the umpires change, and all the coaches were up there. So he kind of called me up to me and said, hey, just so you know, I want you to be my starting first baseman going to nationals. And I want you we're going to go down to the field and we're going to do some extra BP down there and all this kind of stuff. So I'm like, okay. So we go down there and I, of course, do the BP and this and that. And everyone else shows up and we start our practice. And on our way to Montreal, first game's against Dalhousie, which I was starting first baseman. Game started. First at bat. I mean, this is one of those weird things I remember. Runner on third base, less than 2 outs, and I know I got to score this run. And I know. But I think it was just that one moment of that moment just became a little bit too big for me, where I'm thinking like it's Dalhousie, it's nationals, this is a huge moment. It was early in the game. It might have even been the first inning, where we had a guy on third base, and I was up with less than 2 outs, and it was a first pitch fastball. Just like my first at-bat against Niagara was a little bit up and a little bit away. A pitch I should never have swung at. But I was just so amped up, I swung at it, popped it up to third base. Catch, didn't score the run. I kind of jogged back into the dugout, and I kind of had the glare from, McRae. Like, I just knew, like, you had a job to do, and you didn't do it, right? So I'm like, oh, crap. Not a good start. So next at-bat rolls around. There's a runner on second this time. And again, first pitch, hack. Hit a base hit between first and second, scored the run, got to first. This is all with 2 outs. I'm like, okay, better start. And then I remember thinking to myself, with 2 outs, and this is another thing, I was like, look for a ball in the dirt to try and get to second. Like, everything was just happening so fast. And it's one of those things that when you're as a player, when you're first thrown into a situation that you've never played on this level before, the game moves fast. And after you have this experiences, it slows down. So in later games and whatever experiences I have, it's more like I know what to expect. But at that time, I remember the pitcher on the mound throwing a pitch. It was a fastball because I could see it from his hand coming out of his hand, but I could see that his release point was way too far out in front of his body. So I knew he was about to spike the fastball. So the ball comes out and it's going towards the plate. It got to about halfway home. I could see that it was bouncing and I just took off to second base. And sure enough, I peeked over my shoulder after about 3 or 4 strides. I saw the ball bounce, hit the guy in the chest, and by the time he realized that I was going, hopped up, and I don't even think there was a throw down to second, but I got to second base. Next guy just ends the inning on the next pitch. And I remember McRae pointing at me or something, whether saying like, whether that was a good play or not. I mean, it was a lot of nonverbal communication with him at times. But anyway, and that might have been near the 5th inning. I ended up winning. I think I left the game. It was 8-3 for us. So he decided to put in a defensive replacement at first when I left, and that was the last time I saw the field. The whole weekend was after that play. So my memory of that national was just those 2 at bats, and then I just was watching the rest of the way.
Yeah, any competitor wants to be on the field during those key times. Interesting. Did that motivate you? Now we'll talk a little bit about the fact that you go on to a Hall of Fame career off of that first year. Did that motivate you just in terms of wanting to be better or to never be benched again? Tell me a little bit about your mindset between your first year and your second year.
It's hard to say if it was a benching or not. Like, it's really hard. Like, this is the thing. Like, hearing about some of the other people's stories, I kind of thought about it. It's like the first year, it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle, and everyone has like 40 pieces to bring to the table, but we've never seen the other 40 pieces before. And just hearing about those certain situations, like, it makes you kind of think and wonder about why or why not. Like, even thinking of the championship game where it went extra innings and we rolled through the entire bench, and pretty much with the exception of myself and Matt Fletcher, neither one of us got an at-bat in that game, and we lost in extras. And you kind of look at, I talked to him like, we both had some pretty good careers here, and, both in the Hall of Fame and both very good offensive numbers. It's not like we couldn't hit. Why at no point in time was it considered to go to one of us? And other people that were hitting about $120 were pinch hitting in that game, which seemed a little bit bizarre at the time. So I'd be kind of curious if that information ever gets out as to like what the thought processes are at that time as far as who's going in and who's not going in. I mean, I never faced U of T because of all their lefties, and McRae always liked to load up his right-handed lineup, having Juziak, Darrell Houston, and Rick Bottomley. He had to make sure that those 3 were in. Usually Nish was probably playing, so that then took up one of the DH spots. So so I wasn't ever sitting there thinking like that I was being benched. I just saw that. I understand why he's doing that with bringing in lefties or giving other guys an opportunity. But moving past that, going into the next year, it was one of those situations where coming off a team that was put together for 1 year and went to a national championship, you come back and you want to get there again. And it was literally 7 of us that returned. So you have 18 brand new players walking onto the field. And actually, I did not have a good training camp in that second year. Thank God I was on the team in the first year, because Rick Faulkner, who took over for Topping in the second year, he still tells me to this day, he goes, Colin, the only reason why I thought you were on this team is because you were driving the good players to the park, and we needed you to drive the good players to the park. Because at the time I was using my dad's van, and I was bringing like Bots and Nish and all these guys to the park. And so, to a point where it was the first game against U of T at Stan Wadlow Park that year, and Lounsbury puts up the lineup. Who's the new coach now in year 2, and Faulkner, Faulkner tells me he walks up to the lineup and sees Tyler hitting in the cleanup spot, and he goes over to McRae. He goes up to Lounsbury and he's like, Tyler hitting in the cleanup spot, like what? I don't get it. And Lounsbury's like, no, don't worry. And Faulkner's like, God, we must have a crap team. Like, this must be a garbage hitting team. So, and then, of course, when it was game situation, Stan Wadlow, I've always hit well there. I think Faulkner says, he goes, yeah, then you went 5 for 7 with 4 doubles that day. And I shut up. I never said another word again about you hitting in the cleanup spot. So it wasn't like it was a motivation to be benched. It was more of a motivation to try and get back to that level that we were at in that first year. It was such a high standard. The culture was still there, as far as expecting the most and expecting the best out of us. So it was really trying to not let that program down and that team down and all those people that had put in all that time and effort. I just wanted to try and do my part to continue that tradition of winning, which what we had done in that first year.
It's a great answer, Colin. What was it like winning a national championship?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I never won one.
Really? I thought for sure. I thought for sure you were there when, or were you at Durham College the year that they won?
So this is the problem. Remember when I told you that story earlier today about how living in residence allowed me to get to classes? Well, What that also allowed me to do was actually graduate on time. So
a problem for a lot of us, actually.
So I actually graduated on time, unlike my other friends that we've mentioned earlier, and I still to this day bother Nish about how he should be a doctor since he spent about 7 years at Brock. But I was like, yeah, I had graduated at the end of our third season, which we had lost to Mac in the conference final. Mac went on to win the Nationals that year. We lost to Dalhousie in the second year at Nationals final. Lost to Laval in that first year. Got knocked out by Mac in our conference final, and then they went on to win it. And then I graduated from Brock, and then after that I decided to do a post-diploma program at Durham to get into sport administration. So I played a year there with Sam Dempster. And during that season was the season that they had won their first championship I think it was Nova Scotia, was it, where they had won it?
Yeah.
So that was the year that they won it. So unfortunately, for being a good student, I wasn't able to stretch my time there to 5 years where I would have won one. But I just left the year before.
What was it like playing for Sam? I mean, I know Sam very well, obviously. It's a Oshawa guy and the founder of high school baseball in the province, and also the founder of college and university baseball with him and Ken. What was it like playing at Durham for a year? It must have been a total culture shock in terms of coaching and all the rest.
It was a complete culture shock. I went there, and I think I even called him because I'm like, I just want to play baseball, right? And of course, if I'm there, I kind of called him up and I just said, hi, Mr. Dempster, it's Colin. I used to play at Brock. I'm not sure if you remember, because I don't know if people know, whatever. And of course he's like, no, Colin, I know who you are. And I go, well, I'm here. And he's like, yeah, actually, I heard that. I heard that you were at our school. I'm like, well, I kind of wanted to see if I could play on the team. I'm not sure if I am. He's like, oh, yeah, no, you can. So I said to him, I go, so when are the tryouts? And he kind of laughed and he kind of said, listen, Colin, you're transferring from Brock. He's like, you don't need to try out for this team. You're going to be on the team. So just come to the so-and-so practice. So I showed up at the practice, and it was a complete change of everything from what I was used to with the other program. Not in a negative way, just in a different way that things were done. They had been there a little bit longer, a program that had been a little longer, and he kind of had his ways of running things. But the team was much different than what I had come from. We had about 5 very good position players and 1 very good pitcher. And then the rest just didn't have the depth. Yeah. So we had a good season, and from the position player standpoint, I think there's a couple guys that played inter-county, myself, a couple of the Oshawa guys that were, up in the top of the order. And then Brent Heaslip, who pitched for Newmarket for years, was our pitcher, and that was it. So we did well. We ended up taking on Mac in our section of whatever we were called. So if we beat Mac, we would have gone on to Nationals. We beat Queens to knock them out of the playoffs. We beat Queens. Then we played U of T, and U of T beat us 2 straight to knock us out, and they went to Nationals after they had knocked us out. And that was just more of the lack of depth on the team that year. But Sam's a great guy. Was a guy that I could talk to about baseball. I could approach and give him my 2 cents. I remember when we were playing Queens in the playoff game, because we had Heaslip, we were up after 5, and I kind of went over to him. I said, is Heaslip starting game 2? He's like, yeah. I go, well, would you ever consider letting him pitch the last 2 innings here so that we can guarantee this win, and then let him start game 2 and just go as long as he can and then go from there? So he kind of looked at it and he was like, okay, let's give it a try. So Heaslip came in, closed them down for the last 2 innings. So we got our game 1 win. And then he started, I think he threw 4 or 5 to start the next game, and we held on to win that game to beat them. So, a guy that you could just bounce ideas off of, and he would either listen and say yay or nay or this and that. And it was a fun year. I had a great time playing on the team.
Yeah, Sam is a thread that runs through a lot of the Brock program, because he and Ken really got Ted and I on to the train of bringing the team into the mix. And a lot of the players, like my first year of junior was for Sam. So it's, Sam was really interesting. And I still rub it into the fact that, I beat Durham College 3 times in the first year. It was kind of fun to do it. And I see him still every so once in a while. He's like, you should have come to Durham. I'm like, no, I shouldn't have come to Durham. Wow. But interesting. So you have a Hall of Fame career. You go on to play at Durham for a year for another legendary coach. And you're also playing senior baseball at this time. And we had one, crossing of myself and Matt Fletcher and Bottomley, and I think even Andrew came out for a few games to play for a Thornhill team that was, I don't really have words to describe what that experience was like. It was a good team. I mean, I think Colin Cummins ended up playing on that team that year, and we were pretty good. But to say that it was maybe a different level of organization compared to what we were all used to at Brock, the coaches were like players, and like the pitching coach that I had was like a cartoon character. He would smoke cigars. He was an older guy that would pitch himself. He would start himself every 3rd game, I think. And I said to them, I'm going to come here and pitch, but I have conditions at this point in my life because I'm a diva. I'm like, I start games, I don't pitch out of the bullpen, and I just don't want to get hurt. So what does he do? He immediately I would start, and then, he would start 2 days later and insist that I come in relief every time he would get to 5 innings, just so he could qualify for wins. And just an outrageous character. And I had a lot of fun on that team, but Thornhill Senior was an outrageous place to play ball. It was just, there were like 2 pitchers, and you're right, that we could hit like crazy, but I think my arm fell off after about a month of pitching there, because it was, you'd go 5 or 6 or 7, and then you would come in relief, and the expectation was that you'd whenever you came in, you'd finish the game, because we only had 3 pitchers. It was Kevin Brown, myself, and the pitching coach guy, and a couple of people that filled in. Colin, honestly, you'd have been better pitching. I think by that time I was like, I can't believe this is what this form of baseball is, but lots of fun anyway.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Sorry,
what was it like playing rep ball with the guys you'd played with at Brock?
So this was coming out of junior. Once again, and I had no coach in Thornhill. I contacted the senior team because it was the natural, progression to go to senior baseball in Thornhill. And from what I was hearing through the grapevine was that they also didn't have a coach. And the coach that was currently there had stepped back from the program. So I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. Like, I need to try and find a summer team to play on. And every time I try and go back to Thornhill, they're struggling to have a coach. So I kind of made the comment saying to myself, well, I can be a player coach. Like, I can coach and be a player because I just need a team to play on. So I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to put a team together in Thornhill at senior? So I started trying to ask the Brock guys. So I said, hey, Botts, Fletch, Poelman, like, do you guys want to play? Like, I'm just trying to find people in the GTA area to come to play senior ball. So you guys were all kind of, interested in that proposal. And when I showed up to the first, I think it was a phone call right before the first practice, someone said, I hear you want to be the coach. And I said, well, no, I want to play, but I hear we don't have a coach. So I would take on that responsibility. And at the time, they said, okay, well, we have a player that's going to retire and will take over the coaching staff. So that was Rick Vanderwerf, RV. So he kind of was the manager of the team, and he had some friends that joined him. Paul McKeegan, also known as Spider.
Spider,
Yeah,
yeah.
Spider, who I still talk to, quite frequently. Another friend of his named David Jones, and I think the pitching guy that you're most probably talking about is probably a guy named Norm Spears. Now, all these guys are old East York guys. So when you're talking about craziness, it's like they were all East York guys that came over to the Thornhill squad because they wanted out of East York and they just wanted to stay in the league. So they kind of took over the Thornhill organization, where a lot of the Thornhill players were kind of pushed out. And it was kind of turned into a team of people from all over the GTA. So when I joined that club, yeah, we had a lineup. I'd never been in a lineup that could hit like that. Like, I thought the Brock lineup could hit, but I was, talking to, the Brock guys. I'm like, listen, I go, 1 through 9 could hit 5 to 10 home runs a summer on this team. It was ridiculous. You mentioned Colin Cummings, but there is a guy named Steve Wilson who was there, first base. Well, he was a third baseman when I showed up. He moved over to first. I played a little bit of third. But again, which is weird because ultimately I found out that my true position is actually outfield and left field, where I actually spent about, 5 or 10 years playing left field for Thornhill and realized that this is my comfort zone. And this is where I probably should have been my whole life and not anywhere near that infield. But him, James Lee, who we called Tiger, who, played a little bit with the Leafs inter-county, he came over. Like up and down that lineup was insane. And like you said, the issue with senior baseball is trying to find anyone whose arm has lasted into their 20s. And you'd be lucky to have more than 1 or 2 guys that could go. And, playing 9-inning games in your late 20s and 30s, trying to find innings on the mound, it's a tough thing to do. It was an unbelievable team. I know in '99, which is the year after I left Brock, we had an all-star team from that league put together. We played Team Canada as a warm-up game. We had won a Windsor tournament. Our all-star team went undefeated. We mercied pretty much everyone we faced. It was just one of those teams where we had, a bunch of guys from North York, a bunch of guys from Thornhill. We had some Leaside guys. It was a pretty stacked team. Terry Adams was on our. It was unbelievable. Guys that were drafted or had played in the U.S. And anyway, so this is a little bit of an infamous story amongst that crew of people. Is TSN showed up to film the game and do some things all about Team Canada, and we are the home team, and immediately we go down 11-0 in the top of the first. Our Shane Quinn, who's a little side army lefty guy, right-handed, submarine pitcher from North York, kind of gets lit up. And we bring in another guy, McPherson, who played in that Canadian Professional League for that 1 year that was open, and kind of shut the door down and, played that game to a point where we got the game back to, I think it was 13-11, with the bases loaded in the bottom of the ninth with 1 or 2 outs, and Matt Sperling, a North York guy, came to the plate and promptly tripled the center field to win the game. We actually ended up winning 14-13 against Team Canada that night, just to show how much talent was in that league at that time, where, offensively, with the exception of the one pitcher who just couldn't get anyone out, we went toe-to-toe and ended up pulling out a win that night. But it was, it was an incredible team to play on for many years, and still have many good friendships, not only from Brock, where I still talk to a lot of the guys, and I still have a lot of friendships from that Thornhill team. And I think that's, that's really what sport is, right? I know that you had, here's another example, Todd Nye, for example, who you've, spoken with in the past. When we were talking about this reunion, what was it now? A couple years ago originally we talked about this. And you had mentioned that, Todd's a principal up in Simcoe County. And I'm like, oh my God, I go, geez, I there's some good math resources that they use for teaching. And I'm like, I wonder if I could get a hold of him and that he can help me out with some teaching. So you sent me his information. Haven't talked to the guy in 27 years. I sent him an email, say, Todd, it's Colin from Brock. Hopefully you remember me. I'm like, I hear you're a principal. Just wondering if you can help me out. I'm teaching in York region, and I'm looking for anything you can help me out with some math resources so I can help. Like, within a second, no problem, Colin. Great hearing from you. Here it is. I was just like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes to sport and these, as soon as you're a teammate, it's like kind of these lifelong friendships that develop. And again, you never talk to the guy for, a quarter of a century, and he's at a drop of a hat is willing to go out of his way and do something for me. It just blows my mind, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty special that you've maintained relationships with some of the players. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the ones we haven't had contact with for 30 years. I think, another interesting thing is the way that Brad Reeson intersects with you. And we talk a little bit about McMaster. Brad hit the home run to eliminate Brock in your last year there. But you and Brad have always been, up near the top of most of these Metro senior leagues in particular, competing for rookies of the year and all-star and who's going to have the highest batting average. Your careers have kind of intersected as well. And I think we always have to have respect for our opponents. But you and Brad are peas out of the same pod, both guys that just love swinging the bat. Tell me a little bit about your interaction or your intersections with Brad Reeson over the years.
Yeah, so I think my first introduction to him was when he was playing for Mac. And, I think it was that freezing cold game where we went for that doubleheader against them. Again, I don't think I played that night either, which might have been a good thing because it was about 30 degrees below.
Yeah, that was cool.
I think it was probably the Oshawa guys who had said about the second baseman. Like, the second baseman can flat out hit. And so, of course, it gets my ears up. I'm like, I want to see this guy. So, I'm looking at they're doing the in-out before the game, and I'm looking at the second baseman. I'm like, well, where's the second baseman that you're talking about? And you're like, no, it's that guy. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, okay. Like, isn't like a big guy, kind of, average height, a little lanky-ish. Not like, he's not skinny, but just like an average-looking guy, playing deep second base. I'm like, okay, interesting to see. And, I think in that game he promptly, I don't know, he went at 5 for 6 or something. Like, couldn't get him out. And everything was a missile laser. And the thing that impressed me the most, it was so cold that night that as a hitter, when it's that cold, if you don't barrel something up, like it's going nowhere and your hands are shaking, but everything was just off the barrel and on a line. And then I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this guy is pretty good. And that carried over into my first year of senior. I think that year he might have been playing for North York.
Yeah, for sure.
Second base for North York. And I remember my Thornhill guys, I got to the park and I'm looking, I'm like, oh my God, that's Reeson hit there. And they're all like, who the heck's that? Because he's new. I'm new. We're both new into the league. And they have no idea who this kid is. And I'm like, no, this kid can hit. And I kind of look at their faces, and they're all just kind of rolling their eyes, like, what does this rookie know about who can hit? Like, we know who can hit. Like, we can hit. And sure enough, he promptly goes off, and I don't even know how many hits he had that night. But after that game, we're like, yeah, that guy can hit. But yeah, it was a constant battle that year because it came down to the rookie of the year that year in senior baseball. And my coach said to me, he's like, Colin, that's coming down to you and Reeson for rookie of the year. And I was like, oh, that's nice honor, especially to be mentioned in with his breath, like a second baseman that hits 4 something, like falling out of bed, right? And I think the only reason why it ended up coming to me, I ended up getting the award, but I think literally the only reason why it came to me was because I had 30 more at bats for whatever reason. Like, I got to a lot of the games, and for he was probably busy that summer and may have missed out on a few games here and there to a point where his RBI totals and this and that just weren't quite matching mine, but his average was probably even higher than mine at the time too. But yeah, it was one of those things that because we're exactly the same age, we just kind of kept running against each other. We never played on the same team, but kind of against each other for a number of years there as I through Brock and early into senior.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm as a pitcher, you remember the really great hitters, and in my career, I didn't really get to face Brad. He, for some reason, when he was in North York and I was in Thornhill, he missed the games that we played at Brock and Mac. thankfully, like you, I hated the cold weather, and we had just clinched going to nationals. So Coach McRae was like, "Yeah, you don't have to pitch today." I'm like, "Thank goodness," because like I can't imagine facing Reason when you're stiff and you're cold and all that stuff. He'd have killed me. But I never got to face Brad even in high school. So, but watching, you and he were the two best hitters I ever saw consistently. Derek Minix may have been the best power hitter I ever played with. Derek was unbelievable. He played in North York for a while and went down to Sanford. And when I was in Tecumseh, we had Matt Stazicki, who ended up playing at Brock. He was pretty damn good too, up close. And Stubby Clapp at Windsor. A few of these players are really, really good. Being a pitcher, you always remember the one guy you could never get out. And for me, it was a guy named Jason Gold.
Yep.
He was
on that All-Star team with us too, back that team I was talking about that played Team Canada.
Yeah, I could always get the Butler brothers out. I couldn't never get Jason out. The only time I ever got him out, he hit a 405-foot sac fly to the base of the wall in Kinsman Stadium. And the catcher came out and said, "Don't throw that pitch again." So the next time he came up, I threw it to him again, and he hit it out to dead center. Never got that. He may have been 6 for 7 in his career against me. Never got him out. But and it's just be the same for you. You remember the pitchers that were hard on you and the ones that you just owned. I think those are natural. So you have this great career. You played baseball well into your 30s. You're still involved with sports. What's life like been, it's been interfused with sports. What's life like been like for you after you've graduated and gotten into your teaching career? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So once I've kind of got into the teaching career, that it's kind of like that chapter in your life where it's like, okay, now I have a career and now I have an income coming in that's guaranteed, job security, where I can start kind of planning out what I want to do moving forward. So then it comes into things like, purchasing houses and cars and all those things that you were always nervous about doing prior to having a career. So settled in Brooklyn, Ontario, which is the North Whitby part, is where I currently reside in, and been teaching for 19 years. Was heavily involved in, it's elementary, so it's K to 8, so pretty much anything and everything to do for that age group. Did a lot of coaching at the school, and did some coaching outside of school as well, in addition to playing. I played up until 35. Actually, shortly after Brock, playing hockey in a summer league is one of my biggest injuries that has happened, which kind of steered my life in a different direction. Was I tore an ACL playing in a men's league hockey game, just on some really soft, bad ice, turning up the ice, caught a rut, and there goes the knee. And that pretty much derailed anything that I was doing from, baseball standpoint, where, I had to do a whole year of rehab and got back into Thornhill, but was, not the player that I was prior to the injury. And still played that till 35. And then finally kind of said to myself, enough's enough. Like, I'm old enough now. Let the younger guys kind of come in and play. And switched over to the slow pitch standpoint and did that for a number of years. And, that's fun. Just lobbing a ball in and hitting it as far as you can. And then after that, I just kind of got tired of that whole scene. I was about 45 years old and just like, okay, I'm kind of done right now with ball. I just needed a bit of a break. And that's when I switched over to golfing in the summers. My winters, after that whole hockey thing, I just got into curling. And I know that seems strange and bizarre and weird, but it was one of those things where curling was an Olympic sport all those years ago. And I kind of just started watching it and kind of got hooked onto it. And, kind of do that, a couple of nights a week over at the Oshawa Curling Club. So that's kind of what I've been doing sport-wise. But yeah, teaching-wise, I've been teaching for the 19 years and kind of, at that time in my life where I'm kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, 9 years left till retirement, which is a crazy word to even speak of when I still feel like I'm 24 years old talking about retiring. But 9 years away for that moment to happen. And then more golf and more curling and more fun.
Well, you're wearing your Badgers gear and, are Yeah, I won't comment on the.
I have the old jersey here. The old jersey that we used to wear.
Yeah, no, I have a
Let's put this
replica.
on, but it doesn't quite fit. It's a little tight in the bicep.
Gotta let it out a little bit. Turn it into a sleeveless jersey.
Just in this area, it was tight.
No, it's look at we're really going to look forward to seeing our old teammates on the field and getting caught up with them and doing something I think that speaks to these intersection lines. Todd and his incredible attitude and weird left turn that took place with his eye, to Brad Reeson and his enduring legacy at McMaster. It's all part of the same kind of growth area. We all kind of came out of playing in the Canadian baseball system at a time when it was very difficult to get stateside. And even if you were looking at really bad curriculums in particular. I can remember, I won't name him, but he's someone that you and I both know. But his curriculum in Oklahoma consisted of bass fishing and theory of basketball, which I said to him, "What is theory of basketball?" He said, "Well, you go to a gym for an hour and you shoot hoops." Like that sounds tough, And so I think that dream of providing a good competitive league to play in, but that also allowed you to continue with something that resembled a degree and a career afterwards, I think has really been borne out in talking to so many of the alumni of that first ever team. And it was a real sacrifice, I think, because you and I and people like Ted and Rob Green, we would have been used to the course load and the output level required prior to baseball and had settled into a bit of a, this is how I have to plan my life out. And you're right. When you have morning practices and you have 7 days a week of practicing games and you bolt that on to a life, it was a bigger adjustment, I think, for the people who'd already been at school than for the people that were coming in because they didn't have anything to compare it to.
That was massive. And I know, I had obviously a full course load first year. And even we were so naive to what it would take to be a student athlete because even through high school, I'm taking, you just take your full courses, full course load, but then you'd be playing baseball or hockey. So I'd have 2 hockey games that night or a hockey practice. And you just had to, it's called managing your time, right? And going into second year, I kept the full course load, still trying to do a full course load and play baseball, which I think we had 36 games played in 8 weeks. So, and if we're not playing, we're practicing for 3 hours a day. And it wasn't until it was either my third year where I was tagging along with Bottomley and Dixon. They were going to go see their academic advisor. And I didn't even know these existed at this university, right? And we're just, we're all just hanging around each other.
Yeah.
So they went to go check out and talk to their academic advisor, and they were kind of, doing this. I'm just sitting in the back corner just waiting for them to be finished so we can go grab some lunch. And she turns to me and she's like, "Oh, do you play on the team too?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." She's like, "Oh, can we pull up your records?" And I'm like, "Oh, man, we don't want you to see." I'm like, "Okay, sure, why not?" And she pulls up. She goes, "What? You're taking 5 credits?" And I go, "Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to. That's what." She's like, "No." She goes, "You're a student athlete." I'm like, "Well, thank you. I don't consider myself that, but I'll take credit for that." And she goes, "Yeah, being on a team is like a full credit in itself. You honestly should be taking only 3 or 4,
3.5.
Yeah, something like that, right?" So I was like, I had no idea. And I'm like, "Can you please, phone to my parents and tell them that I should be taking 1 less credit right now?" So that's kind of where it all. It wasn't until third year, and if you look at my marks, they dropped 10% as soon as I started playing on that team. And it wasn't because of anything of I didn't care about that as much. It was just the time commitment. And, being away every weekend, playing 4 games in the U.S. on those, vans, you're leaving at, 7 a.m. and you're getting back at, midnight or 1 a.m., whatever that night. It's and then you have an 8 a.m. class or something on the Monday, which I did, which was painful. It was when you have time to have stuff done, it's impossible to do it all. So, it was a crash course on how to navigate that window.
Yeah, there was no how-to manual, right? No one came along and said, don't have Monday morning classes, don't take night classes. Like there was a lot of things that you had to learn, and I can say this now because the statute of limitations probably expired on it, but I had stats as a class in the first year of the Brock team, and I went and may have procured a marked up. You could bring your textbook, the stats textbook, into the exam. I may have procured through bribery a marked up one that had all the answers to the stats exam. It's the only way I could make it through, truthfully. And my daughters are both in university now. One's playing varsity soccer, and I always say to them, I'm not proud of it, but I may have had to cheat my way through some of my courses because it was a lot, right?
It was a lot, and one of our little inside famous jokes was my first year, because I was the first year there, so I took the first year history course and I did an essay on Pearl Harbor and submitted it. And it was like a solid 75, nothing to write home about.
Yeah.
But of course, every other Brock player that came in after that, every single one, someone had to submit the Pearl Harbor essay.
Pearl Harbor.
And the best one, I think Grucci did it the second year, and he ended up with something like a 64 in it. Paper. And I still just say I'm dying about how he got 10% lower on the same paper that was handed in. But I think it was a bit of a tradition. I think it went on for about 3 or 4 years where somebody in that first year course handed in the Pearl Harbor essay.
It's such a Grucci thing that he would get less than you did on it.
But it's great.
That's another T-shirt, right? So that's amazing, Colin. Look, I really appreciate you kind of giving us some insights into, just how important sport's been in your life, and kind of some of the crazy stuff that we went through, and I think people really appreciate that, and looking forward to seeing you on the field. I'm going to end it off on one question because it's a privilege we both have of being members of the Brock Baseball Hall of Fame. What did that mean to you, and does that change the way that you look at either speaking to people who are new to the program, or if you have kids or parents, or just in life, what does that mean for you? Because I know it means something for me, but what does it mean for you?
Yeah, I think for me, when I got the word from Coach Lounsbury, because he was the one that kind of put all that together, and when he reached out to me to let me know, it was one of those feelings of like, just that knowing that all that hard work and everything that you did to put into that program was finally recognized on like an official level. And that whole feeling of like, okay, maybe I was good enough to be in that program, because even just playing, you always kind of second guess yourself, and you have a little bit of that, that anxiety in you, or, was it recognized? Was it enough? Was I a good teammate? What is my legacy coming out of that school? Because oftentimes my father even says to me, we were so happy, my dad and my mother were so happy that I got onto that team. And they said, because we honestly believe that saved you from finishing school. We were worried that you weren't going to finish university because of just who you were, being a quiet kid, being away from home. They were, worried about their child going away to school. And they said, as soon as you got onto that team, you turned into a different person, where we were no longer worried or concerned or had doubt about you getting out of there with a degree. And when you get that news that not only were you on a successful program, but recognized as someone who kind of went above and beyond, I guess, from an expectation standpoint or a playing standpoint, it definitely gives you that confidence where you can then take that knowledge out into the world and say, well, this is how I did it. And you can kind of teach that theory. And maybe it kind of got into the teaching little bug too, where it's like, it's that little feather in the hat of, this is an amazing recognition that I truly honor and I truly appreciate. And every time I see the names of the people that are on that list that are in there, I was just like, wow, it's an honor just to be talked about with those people. And just that I was able to do with such great friends was just such a bonus, right? And it's almost like, it's one of those things that I still to this day, and I might throw it into my niece's face once in a while when they start doing their sports. I'm like, hey, listen, You're talking to a Hall of Famer here. You can't be trash talking your uncle. So let's move on, right? So I don't use that as leverage.
Yeah, I went to Ted Stone's induction into the Durham an area Sports Hall of Fame, and it's just an acknowledgement, really, of the work you put in, the attitude that you develop as a result, and more so, it's a reflection of the quality of the people that are in there, who they shed a light on. Sometimes, it's you're not familiar with everybody that's in there, but I pretty much know everyone that, and have had some exposure to everybody that gets the call from that perspective. And are they the best players all the time? No. Sometimes they're the best people. Are they, people that you would start a major league team with? No, but they might be the type of person that you would start a groundbreaking corporation with. It's there are other things that go into being a member of a Hall of Fame other than your physical accomplishments on a field, because we both played with people who were outlandishly good from a physical standpoint, but didn't always have the attitude or the mental toughness in particular in the sports field to put it all together. They'd struggle. They'd shrink in moments where you needed to rise to the occasion. And that, to me, is the one thing that I see with everybody that, gets those kinds of accolades in life, is at some point they needed to rise to the occasion and be at their best at a moment where it called for them to be at the best, and they answered that call. And, I think of, some simple moments watching you, and it wasn't at Brock, it was in Thornhill, where we would be playing, North York. I can remember a game against North York, or one against Leaside in particular, where you stepped into the batter's box, and I could, with very few people, I'd be like, I know that he's going to get a hit right here, and it's going to go into the right center field gap, and he'll have to really hustle his ass off to get to second base. But you don't get, baseball, look at, a great average is, well, these days a great average is getting a hit once every 4 at-bats. But at that time, the standard was a little bit higher. Still 66% of the time you're failing as a hitter. But there were times where I could look at you and go, I just know that he's going to get a hit right now because it's important for us, and because mentally he's going to win. And that, to me, bringing that perspective to not only sports but life, and then being able to maybe, put in a little funny comment with that little giggle of yours, is what separates, the truly great from the very good. And Colin, you're a truly exceptional teammate, and really a credit to the Brock program. So I'm super thrilled that you're able to give us a little bit of insight. And, I'll still laugh about this kindergarten thing for quite a while, because I think it's safe to say you've graduated.
Excellent.
Thanks for your time, Colin.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you for all the kind words, Poelman, and looking forward to this game that's coming up.
Yeah, we'll both need the double XL jersey, I think. You for your big arms, me for my big guts. So, thanks, man.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.